The laughter started quietly. That was the cruelest part. Not a roar. Not the kind of obvious cruelty that a room could collectively shame into silence. Just a ripple. The kind that begins at the farthest edge of a gathering and moves inward like cold water, finding every crack in a stone floor. A gloved hand raised to a painted mouth. A pair of eyes travelling slowly, deliberately, from the hem of a gown upward. A whisper passed between two women who had spent their entire lives perfecting the art of destruction without ever raising their voices above a murmur. Zara Curtis stood in the entrance of the Valmont Palace ballroom and understood, in the space of 10 seconds, exactly what the next 3 hours were going to cost her. She had known it would be difficult. She had not known it would begin before she had taken her second step inside. The ballroom was everything she had imagined and nothing she had prepared for. Crystal chandeliers suspended from ceilings painted with clouds and golden angels caught the candlelight and threw it across the room in fragments, across silk gowns in every colour that wealth could name, across jewels that cost more than her family's house, across women who moved through warmth and brilliance as though they had been born inside it and had never once considered that any other kind of life existed. The orchestra played something light and merciless from the gallery above. Beneath it, the room hummed with the specific sound of a world deciding, continuously, automatically, without mercy, who belonged and who did not. She did not belong. She had known that before she came. She had come anyway. Her gown was pale blue, had been pale blue once, when her mother had first sewn it some 12 years prior for a client who never collected it. Zara had spent 3 weeks remaking it. 3 weeks of candlelight and aching fingers and stitches so careful they were nearly invisible along seams that had frayed with age. She had salvaged lace from 2 other discarded pieces. She had restrung pearls from a broken necklace along the neckline, with thread so fine it disappeared against the fabric. From a distance, and she had checked, standing back from the mirror in their small upstairs room while her mother tried not to cry. From a distance, it looked like something a woman of modest means might wear to a formal occasion and not be ashamed of. Up close, it looked like what it was. She lifted her chin and walked into the ballroom. Across the room, on a raised platform beside the orchestra gallery, a man stood in conversation with 2 ministers and felt, for the first time since arriving at his own family's celebration, something shift in him. He had not been paying attention to the doors. He had no reason to. Women had been arriving for 2 hours, and every one of them had entered the room wearing the same expression, practiced radiance, the specific smile of someone who has rehearsed this moment in a mirror and knows exactly which angle of their face the candlelight favors. He had watched it enough times tonight that it had become wallpaper, decorative, present, entirely invisible to him. Then something changed at the edge of his vision, not because she was the most beautiful woman in the room, but because she was the only one who walked in looking as though the next 3 hours might genuinely cost her something real. Prince Mason Valmont watched Zara Curtis take her second step into his family's ballroom. He watched the ripple of quiet laughter begin at the edges of the room, watched it move, watched it reach her, watched her feel it land and lift her chin against it, and felt, in the space of that single moment, something he had not felt in a very long time. Anger, not at her, for her. Zara found the edge of the room and stayed there. This was not cowardice. This was strategy. She had come with a purpose, to be seen by enough of the right people that her mother's name might surface in the right conversations. Mrs. Cecile Curtis, formerly of the Royal Tailoring Commission, 20 years of craftsmanship that dressed 3 generations of noblewomen before a false accusation, a ruined reputation, and a royal physician husband, blamed for a scandal he had no part in, quietly dismantled everything the family had built. Zara was not here to dance. She was here to save what remained. She kept her hands folded in front of her, and her expression entirely composed, and moved slowly along the perimeter of the room. Scanning faces she recognized from her mother's old commission lists. Lady Sullivan, the Countess of Ashby, perhaps Lady Ferris, who had always spoken warmly of her mother's embroidery before warmth became socially costly. She did not find them quickly enough. What she found instead was a group of 4 women standing near the champagne table who stopped their conversation the moment Zara came within 10 feet of them. Not because she had interrupted anything, because her presence had become the conversation. The tallest of them, dark-haired, diamond-throated, wearing a gown that probably cost more than Zara's mother earned in 18 months, looked her over with the particular patience of someone who has never needed to hurry a cruelty. "Are you lost, dear?" The other 3 laughed, soft, restrained, completely audible. Zara kept her expression neutral. "Not at all. Thank you. Only," the woman continued, and her voice carried just enough to reach the nearest cluster of guests. "I noticed you came in through the main entrance. The staff entrance is around the east side of the building, through the garden." The nearest cluster had turned to listen. Zara felt it the way you feel weather changing. A shift in atmosphere, a sudden drop in temperature that the room pretends not to notice. "I am a guest," she said, quietly, precisely, "as I believe are you." Something moved through the tall woman's expression. Surprise, briefly, and then something considerably colder. "How extraordinary," she said, and turned back to her companions. The laughter this time was less restrained. Zara turned and walked away before anyone could see that her hands, folded so carefully in front of her, had begun to tremble at the wrists. She found the balcony archway and stood inside it, half hidden by the thick velvet draping. Outside, through tall glass doors left open despite the December air, the palace gardens stretched away in patterns of dark hedgerow and frozen fountain. The cold helped. She focused on it, on the clean sharpness of the air against her face, and breathed until her hands were still again. 15 more minutes. She would find Lady Sullivan. She would say her mother's name to someone with the power to act on it. Then she would leave before anything else happened. "You look like someone doing arithmetic." She turned sharply. She had not heard him come onto the balcony. He stood perhaps 6 feet from her, one hand resting on the stone railing, looking not at her but at the dark garden below. And she recognized him with a slow, specific shock that moved through her entire body. The prince. She had seen his portrait. Everyone had. The reality was somewhat different from the portraiture, which tended toward flattery and careful formality. The man standing on the balcony in the December cold looked considerably less like a portrait and far more like someone who had recently, definitively, run out of patience. She gathered herself. "Your Royal Highness, I beg your pardon. I didn't realize. You're not required to beg anything." He glanced at her briefly. "You were clearly here first. I'm the one who invaded your balcony." She did not know what to do with that. She said nothing, a silence. The garden below was very still. "What arithmetic?" he said. "I'm sorry. You looked as though you were calculating something when I came out. What was it?" It was not quite a question. It had the shape of one, without the apologetic uncertainty that questions usually carry. She considered refusing to answer. She considered a polite deflection. Something about the cold air and the distance from the ballroom made both feel like far too much effort. "I was calculating," she said carefully, "how much longer I needed to endure this evening, before I can leave it with something to show for having come." He looked at her then, fully, the kind of look that was genuine assessment rather than practiced admiration, which she found considerably easier to bear. "That is," he said, "the most honest thing anyone has said to me tonight. I imagine most people tell you what you want to hear, Most people tell me what they want me to think, they want me to want to hear. A pause, which is considerably more exhausting than it sounds. From inside the ballroom, the orchestra shifted. Something grander, more formal, the kind of music that accompanied an official announcement. Zara watched through the glass doors as the room reorganized itself around the new sound. This was the world in which her mother's name needed to find traction. She should be inside it. I should go back in, she said. In a moment. He said it without authority, which somehow made it more compelling than authority would have. You haven't told me what you need to show for the evening. She looked at him. He was watching the garden again. A commission, she said. My mother is a seamstress. She once held a royal appointment. Things have changed since then. I hoped tonight might. She stopped. She was not going to explain the fullness of their situation to the heir to the throne on a balcony in December. I had hoped to speak with a few of the ladies inside. A silence, the kind that had texture and weight to it. And instead, he said quietly, you are standing out here. Instead, I am standing out here. She looked at him steadily. Every woman in that ballroom wants something from you tonight. I am the only one who came for something else entirely. I thought you might find that clarifying. He turned his head and looked at her. He did not speak for a long moment. Something moved through his expression. Not quite surprise and not quite recognition, but living in the territory between them, in some place that had not been reached in a very long time. Yes, he said finally, I do. She found Lady Sullivan 20 minutes later. The conversation lasted 4 minutes and produced nothing. Lady Sullivan's eyes had moved over Zara's gown with the quiet inventory of someone making a decision before their mouth said anything at all. Zara thanked her graciously and moved on. The ballroom was reaching the height of its momentum. The orchestra had shifted into the formal dance sequence. Waltzes, primarily, with the kind of sweeping grandeur designed to make a room feel like it was part of something permanent and glorious. Zara watched couples assemble on the floor, the daughters of dukes, the heiresses of fortunes recently elevated by title. Women who had spent months preparing for precisely this season, this evening, this moment of being seen by the right person. She was considering slipping quietly toward the exit when she heard it. Not loud, not theatrical, perfectly calibrated to carry precisely as far as intended and no further. Stitching along the sleeve, do you see? There and there. Poor thing must have assembled it from curtain remnants. 3 women, slightly behind her and to the right, were not looking at her. That was the sophisticated part. They were gesturing to each other, voices pitched at that precise frequency that was just audible enough to be entirely intentional. Beside them, a 4th woman who had not been part of the original group turned to look, understood what was being discussed, and smiled. Is that repaired lace along the neckline? I believe it is. A light laugh. Bless her heart. Did she stitch those pearls herself, do you think? She must have a pause, long enough to ensure the room had time to turn, and then no longer pitched quietly at all. Did you come to dance, darling, or to beg? The nearest conversation died. Then the one beyond it. Zara turned. She looked at the woman who had spoken, young, blonde, wearing a gown the colour of deep water and an expression of mild, amused contempt, and she said nothing, because any response would become the story, because silence was the only form of dignity available to her in this moment, and she was going to hold it if it destroyed her. The woman raised one perfect eyebrow. Around them, heads had turned. Someone laughed. Not cruelly enough to be scandalous, but enough, precisely enough, to land where it was aimed. Zara stood very still. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely, under no circumstances whatsoever, going to cry. The orchestra reached the end of its current piece. A pause. The shuffled half-silence between dances while the conductor consulted, the social machinery of the ballroom resetting itself. And then she heard footsteps, even, unhurried, moving across the marble floor with the particular steadiness of someone who has never once needed to rush, because the room has always arranged itself around him. She turned. The Prince of Valmont was crossing the ballroom floor. The room noticed before Zara fully processed what she was seeing. She watched it happen. That specific social shift, that collective pause, spreading outward from where he moved like a stone, dropped in still water. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Women straightened. Men turned from their discussions. Two duchesses she recognized by the sheer weight of their jewels repositioned their shoulders toward him with the unconscious instinct of flowers turning toward light. He walked past both of them. He walked past three women Zara knew were daughters of the most titled families in the kingdom. He walked past every single person in that ballroom and stopped in front of her. The room did not simply go quiet. It experienced something more specific. The particular silence that only descends when something occurs that no one present has a social category for, when the established script has broken and no one knows what comes next. Zara looked up at him. He was looking at her, not at the room, not at the effect he was having, at her, with the same expression he had worn on the balcony, private, certain, with nothing in it that was performing. He bowed, formally, deliberately, in full view of everyone present. When he straightened, he extended his hand. "Miss Curtis," he said, "only for her. May I have this dance?" If you have ever stood in a room full of people who looked through you as though you were made of glass, and then watched one person, just one, look at you as though you were the only solid thing in the space, then you already understand what Zara Curtis felt in this moment. You don't need me to explain it. You feel it in your chest, in some old unhealed place, and you recognize it completely. Stay close. This story has only just begun. And I promise you, what comes next is worth every second. Subscribe to Power and Silence Whispers so you never miss a story like this one. Turn on your notifications. And tell me, in the comments, have you ever been in a room where you were made to feel like you didn't belong? And did anyone ever prove them wrong? She had not expected to dance. She had no strategy for what it meant, and no emotional armor prepared for the experience of being led onto a floor that had just watched her humiliation and was now watching something else entirely. Something it did not yet have the language for. His hand was light at her waist. That surprised her. She had half expected the grip of someone accustomed to commanding things, firm, directive, certain. Instead, his touch was careful, present but not possessive, as though he were aware that he was holding something that had already been handled roughly tonight, and intended to be the opposite of that. "You don't have to look quite so alarmed," he said quietly. "I am not alarmed. You are holding yourself as though you expect the floor to give way." She made a deliberate effort to release her shoulders. Better, marginally. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, the shape of one controlled before it could fully arrive. "You dance well. My father believed in education, music, languages, dancing." She kept her gaze at a fixed point over his shoulder, dancer's technique, but also armor. He believed very strongly in being prepared for a world that might not always want you in it. She felt him absorb that. The quality of his listening shifted, became more complete, more deliberate, the way attention changes when something real is being said. He sounds like a man of considerable foresight. He was. Past tense. He registered it. She did not explain it further. Around them, the ballroom had resumed its breathing. Conversation restarted. The orchestra played on. But the quality of the room's attention had not left them. Zara felt it the way you feel light through closed eyelids. not watching it directly, feeling it continuously. 40, 50, perhaps 100 pairs of eyes that had dismissed her an hour ago and were now performing the most painful revision of their earlier assessment. She kept her gaze fixed. Let them revise. Why? She said. He waited. There are a great many women in this room who have been hoping for exactly this opportunity all evening. She said it carefully, without accusation. Women whose families would benefit significantly from attention. Women who have prepared for. She stopped. Why me? The waltz turned them. In the brief rotation, she caught a glimpse of the blonde woman who had spoken to her earlier, standing frozen at the edge of the floor with an expression that Zara filed carefully in the part of her memory reserved for things that deserved to be remembered. Because, Mason said, after a silence that had counted several measures of music in it, every other woman in this ballroom is performing, and you are the only one I have encountered tonight who is simply surviving. She looked at him then, directly. That is a strange basis for a dance, she said. It is the most honest basis I have managed in years. She held his gaze for a moment. One beat, two, then looked away, not in retreat. With the measured deliberateness of someone who knows that looking too long at something this dangerous will cost considerably more than they can currently afford. You should know, she said quietly, that I did not come here tonight hoping you would notice me. I know, and that I will not. She paused, selecting words with precision. Whatever people say about this evening, I want you to understand that I came for a commission for my mother. I am not attempting anything. Miss Curtis. His voice dropped lower. If you were attempting something, I would know. I have had a lifetime of education in recognizing it. A pause. Your distinction is precisely the absence of it. The music was building toward its final movement, that swelling, inevitable gathering of sound that meant the world was about to return. What happens, she said, after the music stops? He looked at her. Something in his expression was careful, in a way it had not been before. Careful the way a person is careful with something they do not want to break. That, he said, remains to be seen. The music stopped. He stepped back, bowed, formally, exactly as before. The room produced a sound that was somewhere between breath and whisper. Zara curtsied, kept her face composed, straightened and walked, alone, back toward the edge of the ballroom. She did not look back. She felt him watching her leave. She felt it between her shoulder blades, specific and warm, all the way to the door. She left the palace at 10:20. She had received 3 commission inquiries, Wade, in the final hour. Not from the families she had targeted, but from women who had watched their dance and quietly revised their arithmetic. Zara had accepted their cards with measured gratitude and given nothing away. Her mother was awake when she arrived home. Of course she was. Cecile Curtis sat in the chair by the fireplace, the only room they heated past bare necessity, with a shawl around her shoulders and her hands folded in the posture of a woman who has been praying and is refusing to call it that. Zara set her bag on the table, sat across from her mother, placed 3 cards on the surface between them. Cecile picked them up. Read each one, set them down. Zara. They came to me, Zara said. I want you to know that. I sought out Lady Sullivan, and that came to nothing. These 3 came to me. Why? Her mother's voice was very careful. Zara looked at the fireplace. Something happened at the ball. Cecile waited. The prince asked me to dance. The silence in the room was entirely different from the silence in the ballroom. This one was soft and full, the silence of a woman hearing something that the most hidden part of her had hoped for and the most honest part of her had feared. Zara! It meant nothing, Zara said. Not harshly, simply. He was being kind, or making a point to someone. It doesn't matter what it meant. What matters is that there are 3 commissions on the table, and we have a chance to survive the winter. Her mother looked at her for a long moment, long enough that Zara felt the weight of everything Cecile was choosing not to say. "Was he kind to you?" she asked finally. Before the dance. Was he kind to you?" Zara thought of a balcony in December, a man looking at a dark garden rather than at her, which had felt, strange to admit, more respectful than being directly observed. "The most honest thing anyone has said to me tonight." "Yes," she said, "he was kind." Cecile held the commission cards for a moment longer. Then she set them down and said nothing further. Zara was grateful for that. She went upstairs and took off the pale blue gown and hung it carefully in the dark wardrobe and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. She did not think about the dance. She was very deliberate about not thinking about the dance. It did not work at all. The newspapers found her in 4 days. She did not read them herself. Her mother did, which was in some ways worse off, because Cecile read with the particular stillness of someone absorbing impact without allowing herself to react to it. Then set the papers aside with careful hands and said nothing. Zara found one eventually, in a shop. A single paragraph tucked beneath a rather gleeful subheading, "The Prince's Peculiar Partner. Who is the mystery girl in the mended gown?" The paragraph was not cruel in the way the women at the ball had been cruel. It was a different cruelty entirely, amused, distant, clinical, in the way print could be when it discussed human beings as though they were curiosities, rather than people with histories and mothers, and 3 weeks of candlelight stitching behind them. She set the paper down, walked home. 2 weeks after the ball, a letter arrived. No sender name on the envelope. Inside, 3 sentences in handwriting that was formal, controlled, and careful. "I hope you will forgive the presumption of this note. I find myself thinking about something you said, about your father, and his beliefs about preparation. I should like very much to continue that conversation, if you would permit it. No signature, only an address. A small house in the quieter district north of the palace, used, she would eventually understand, for meetings that did not appear in official schedules." She sat with the letter for 4 days. She told herself that responding was practical, that the prince had access to people who could help her mother, that a carefully managed relationship with the royal household might open doors that had been closed for 5 years. She told herself this was strategy, not feeling. She was very thorough about telling herself this. On the 5th day, she wrote back. She sealed the letter and sent it, and then sat in the empty kitchen afterward and was completely honest with herself for approximately 3 minutes, which was all the honesty she could afford at one sitting. Then she got up and went back to work. They met 7 times over the following 6 weeks, always at the same quiet address, always in the early afternoon, always with tea that went cold and a fire that needed no commentary. The meetings had a quality Zara could not name with any word that felt safe to use, a quality of aliveness, of being more fully present in her own skin than she was anywhere else. He asked about her father. Genuinely, carefully, as though he wanted to understand the whole shape of the thing rather than just its outline. She told him, in pieces, across several meetings, the story as she knew it. How Dr. Thomas Curtis had served as royal physician for 11 years. How something had happened in the winter of 1861, some political difficulty she had never fully understood, and how her father had been quietly accused of impropriety and dismissed. How the accusation had never been formally confirmed or denied, had simply existed, like a stain, colouring everything the family touched afterward. How her father had died 2 years later, not dramatically, not scandalously, but quietly, from an illness Zara had always privately believed was made partly of defeat. Mason listened to all of it. He asked careful questions. He did not offer comfort or apologize on behalf of forces he had not personally controlled. He simply listened, which was, Zara was discovering, a rarer quality in powerful men than anyone admitted. "You are angry about it," he said once. "Not a question. I have a great deal of practice at not showing it. That is not the same as not being angry." She looked at him. "No," she said. "It isn't. Good." Quiet, but fierce, a fiercer conviction than she had expected from him. "You should be. What happened to your family was." He stopped. Something moved through his face. Complicated, internal, as though he had reached for a conclusion and found something unexpected waiting at the end of it. It should not have happened the way it did. She noted the phrasing. The way it did. Not, it should not have happened. She filed it away. The fourth meeting was the one she would remember with the most precision. It had been raining, a grey, determined February rain that made the streets outside the windows look like something from a painting, and they had been talking for nearly 2 hours, which was longer than any previous meeting, and neither of them had acknowledged this. Had been describing the particular exhaustion of formal court appearances, not complaining, exactly, but being honest in the way he was honest when he had temporarily forgotten to manage what he revealed. And she had said, without thinking, "You sound like someone who has been performing so long they've forgotten what the alternative feels like." He had gone very still. "Yes," he said after a moment. "That is exactly what it is." She had not meant it as an observation about her, but she understood, in the silence that followed, that he was telling her it wasn't only about the court, that something in her company, specifically, had reminded him that an alternative existed. She looked at the rain against the window. Neither of them said anything for quite some time. But the silence was different from the silences that preceded it. It had weight and warmth in it, and a particular quality of acknowledgement, the kind that happens between two people when something has shifted between them and both of them know it, and neither of them is quite ready to name it. She was in considerably more danger than she had been 6 weeks ago. She knew it. She went home anyway. She came back the following week anyway, and the week after that. The seventh meeting was in the second week of February. She arrived to find him already there. Unusual. He was generally scrupulous about the appearance of her arriving first. He was standing at the window. He turned when she came in, and the particular quality of his stillness told her something had shifted before he said a word. "I want to be honest with you about something," he said. She sat down. "All right." He remained standing. "There is pressure from the court to make a formal announcement before the spring season. An engagement. One of three families, each with daughters who are by every measurable standard perfectly appropriate candidates." He said this without inflection, which was its own kind of feeling. "The Queen has made her preferences clear. My advisers have made their preferences clear. The only remaining uncertainty is mine." The fire was the only sound in the room for a moment. "That is the way of things," she said carefully. "Yes." A pause. "I find I have considerably less patience with the way of things than I once did." She looked at her hands, then at him. "Mason. First name." She had not used it before. She watched him receive it. The slight shift in his attention, the stillness becoming a different quality of stillness. "What are you telling me?" He crossed the room and sat across from her. The distance between them was proper. Every meeting had been proper, but there was something in the quality of that distance that made it feel like the opposite of what it was. "I am telling you," he said, "that I am aware I have no right to say anything that makes your life more complicated than it already is." He stopped. Something behind his eyes struggled with itself and did not entirely win. "I am also finding it very difficult to be as careful as I should be." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are a prince," she said. and I am the daughter of a disgraced physician who arrived at the ball in a repaired gown. The world has a very clear opinion about what happens next." "The world's opinion," he said quietly, "has not been particularly useful to me. It has been devastating to me." She said it gently, but she said it fully. "I know what happens to women who trust that love is stronger than circumstance. I have watched my mother pay that cost for 5 years." She stood, gathered herself. "I think we should perhaps not meet again for some time." He stood too. He did not reach for her. She saw the effort of that deliberate restraint, and it was somehow worse than if he had reached. "Zara." "Thank you," she said, "for the commission referrals." "For." She stopped herself before the sentence became more than she intended. "For being kind." She left before he could answer. She sat in the carriage on the way home and watched the February streets and pressed her hands flat against her knees, and was, for a while, simply very still. She told herself she had made the right decision. She told herself this with great thoroughness. It helped less than she needed it to. There is a particular kind of courage that looks, from the outside, like simple walking away. Zara Curtis knows that cost. She has been paying versions of it her entire life. And yet the question that won't leave me is this. When someone finally sees you, truly sees you, after years of being invisible, is protecting your self-wisdom? Or is it one more thing the world has taken from you without asking? If this story is living somewhere in your chest right now, you are exactly where it wants you. Subscribe to Power and Silence Whispers. Turn on your notifications and leave me a comment. Do you think Zara was right to walk away? Or was she letting fear make her decisions for her? She was almost entirely certain she had been right to walk away. She was telling herself this with considerable conviction on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks later, when her mother came into the workroom, carrying an expression Zara recognized immediately. Not distress, not excitement, but the specific look of a woman who has found something she is not certain she wanted to find. "There was a man here this morning," Cecile said, "while you were at the market." Zara set down her scissors. "What man?" He did not give a name. He left this. Cecile placed an envelope on the work table. "He said it was to do with your father." The envelope was plain. No seal, no livery, nothing identifying. Inside, a single page. The handwriting was not Mason's. This was older, slightly less controlled. The handwriting of someone who had spent years writing things for the official record and had learned, in doing so, exactly how to say a great deal while appearing to say very little. She read it once, sat down, read it again. "Zara," her mother's voice was very careful. "What does it say?" "It says." She stopped. "Read it a third time," as though the meaning might change if she gave it another opportunity. "It says that father's dismissal from the royal household was not the result of any professional misconduct." She looked up. "It says he was dismissed to protect certain members of the court from exposure, that there was a crisis in the winter of 1861, something involving falsified records in the Crown's financial arrangements, and father discovered evidence of it in the course of treating a patient." A pause that lasted longer than she intended. He was offered a choice: remain silent and keep his position, or refuse and lose everything. The workroom was absolutely still. "He refused," Zara said. Cecile sat down slowly in the chair by the window. Zara watched her mother's face move through something, the old grief refamiliarized, arriving back from a direction she hadn't expected. And then something beneath the grief, something older and harder and fiercer. "He told me," Cecile said finally. Her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "Not all of it. He said there had been a choice and that he had made it, and that he was at peace with what he'd chosen." A pause that contained years in it. "I did not understand the full shape of it until after he was gone." "You knew," Zara said. "You knew there was more. I knew the accusation was false. I knew he had decided something that cost us everything and had decided it without regret. She looked at her hands. I did not know the details. I did not know it was. I did not know the size of what he protected. Zara set the letter on the table between them, smoothed it flat with her palm, looked at it. Her father had discovered that powerful men surrounding the throne were stealing from the crown. He had refused to pretend otherwise. And the crown, the same crown that had sat at the center of their lives, the same institution her mother had dressed and served and believed in for 20 years, had allowed her family to fall into ruin rather than acknowledge what he had done for it. 5 years of her mother sewing by candlelight in a crumbling house. 5 years of closed doors and revised invitations, and the particular daily indignity of a family that used to matter discovering precisely what used to means. Her father dying at 53 from an illness that Zara had always, privately, suspected was constructed partly of the specific despair of a good man who had done the right thing and watched it destroy everything he loved. She sat with all of this for a long time. Then, who sent this? I told you he didn't give. Not the messenger. She looked up. Who sent this? Because this kind of document, specific, detailed, appearing after 5 years of silence, timed with the particular precision of someone who had spent time verifying details before releasing them, did not materialize from nowhere. It was sent by someone who had decided, for reasons of their own, that it was time for it to surface. Someone with access to sealed royal archives. Someone who had said, weeks ago, in a quiet room over cold tea, "What happened to your family should not have happened the way it did." She sat with that phrasing, the phrasing she had filed and kept, and felt the full shape of it arrive. She stood up, put on her coat, and went out. She did not go to the quiet house north of the palace. She wrote instead, sent the letter by hand, and waited. 2 days later came his response, brief, direct. "I did not mean for you to find out this way. I ask for a conversation, not for any other reason than that you deserve the truth from me directly." She went. He was waiting. He did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, with his hands at his sides, and he looked like someone who had been bracing for this specific moment and had decided, somewhere between anticipation and arrival, to simply meet it without armor. "You found the document," she said. "Yes. How long have you known?" He did not flinch. She was grateful for that. Gratitude she would not show him, but felt. "I found references to it 3 months ago, in archives that required my personal authorization to access. I spent some time verifying the details before." He stopped. "I did not want to bring you something incomplete." 3 months. She stood in the center of the room and felt something enormous and ancient beginning to move in her. "You have known for 3 months that this institution, your family's institution, destroyed my father's name. His career, his life, Mason. It destroyed his life. And you, yes. Quiet. I know. And you said nothing. I was trying to find the right way to." He stopped. Whatever he had been reaching for, he set it aside. "I am sorry. I know that is not sufficient. I am telling you now because you had a right to know. And every day I did not tell you was another day it remained buried. And I could not." He looked at her directly. "I did not want to be one more person who kept it from you." Zara stood in the middle of the room with the full weight of it pressing against her chest. Not grief alone, and not fury alone, but the vast, complicated thing that lives beneath both of them. Her father, her brilliant, principled, quietly devastated father, who had believed in honesty the way other men believed in God, and had paid for that belief with everything they had. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She was fiercely proud of how steady her voice was. "Whatever you want me to do." That is not an answer. It is the truest answer I have. He crossed the room toward her. Not quickly, not dramatically. with the simple deliberateness of someone who has made a decision and is living it. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the expression on his face without ambiguity. I cannot undo what was done to him. I cannot give you your father back. I cannot give your family the years you lost. He paused. What I can do depends entirely on what you want. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, at the expression that had nothing performed in it, the expression she had first seen on a December balcony when he looked at a dark garden rather than at her. What I want, she said finally, is for the truth to exist somewhere other than a document in a sealed archive. Something changed in his face. Not relief, it was too complicated for relief. Something more like a door opening that had been shut for a very long time. Then that is what will happen, he said, simply. Certainly. She breathed. Why are you doing this? Because it is right. That is not the only reason. A silence. He did not deny it. No, he said. It is not the only reason. She looked at him. She felt the full weight of what she was standing inside. The history of her family, the weight of 5 years, the truth of her father's sacrifice. And she also felt beneath all of it and running through all of it, like a current, the thing she had been very carefully not naming for 6 weeks. I walked away, she said. I walked away because I know what happens when women from my world attach themselves to men in yours. I have watched my mother pay that cost, and I told myself I would not. I know. He said it immediately. I am not asking you to do anything. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful and completely certain. I am asking you to consider, he said, that you are not a risk I am tolerating. You are not a complication I am managing. You are not a curiosity that will pass. He looked at her steadily. I am asking you to believe that I have been at risk since the moment I saw you standing at the edge of that ballroom, trying not to cry and refusing to. The room held them both in silence. I need time, she said. Yes. No hesitation, no qualification. Of course you do. She left, but she was thinking, in the carriage, in a way she had not permitted herself before. She was thinking very carefully and very honestly. And she was beginning, just beginning, to understand that protecting herself from wanting something and actually not wanting it were not, and had never been, the same thing. The spring season arrived with its particular compressed force, accelerating every outstanding question toward resolution, pressing every unfinished emotional negotiation into a series of assemblies and dinners and public occasions at which things either settled or were left to wait another full year. Mason appeared at every required engagement. Zara knew this from the newspapers and from the specific quality of silence that descended on the subject whenever she was in company. He was, by court consensus, behaving strangely, turning down the right invitations and attending the wrong ones, declining audiences with the families of proposed fiancés, being seen twice, unattended, in the quieter northern district. The society columns were beginning to connect threads that Zara read each morning, with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to absorb information without showing what it does to them. He had written to her once in the 3 weeks since her visit, brief, not demanding, simply, I find the city considerably quieter since February. I wanted you to know I have not forgotten what I said I would do. The process is underway. She had read it 4 times, written back once, 3 sentences, formal and composed, thanking him for the update. She had stared at those 3 sentences for a long time before sending them, knowing they said almost nothing of what she actually meant, and knowing also that she was not yet ready to say what she meant. Not until she understood the full shape of it herself. The Queen summoned him on a Thursday morning. Zara learnt this afterward, in a letter that arrived the following Tuesday, And the letter was composed and careful, each sentence measured, but running through it like a thread pulled tight was the line 4 times before she could continue past it. She told me that my continued interest in you would ruin you. She did not say it unkindly. She said it, as she says most things, as established fact, as though the matter had already been settled, and she was simply informing me of a conclusion already reached. She may be right about the risks. She is not right about what I am willing to do about them. I have been thinking about nothing else since. Zara set the letter on the work table, picked up her scissors, set them down, went to the window, watched the street below for a long time. Her mother came in from the front room, looked at Zara, looked at the letter, said nothing, which was one of Cecile Curtis's most refined and loving skills. "Mother," Zara said, not turning from the window, "did father ever tell you he regretted it, the choice he made?" Cecile was quiet for a moment. Once, near the end, her voice was soft. He said he wondered if he'd been selfish. If choosing his conscience over his security was a luxury he didn't have the right to, when we depended on him. "What did you say?" "I told him that a man who could be bought with security was not a man worth depending on." A pause. "I told him I would have been ashamed of any other choice, that we were his and he was ours, and that meant something more than the house." Zara turned from the window. She looked at her mother, at Cecile's face, which had survived 5 years of difficulty without losing any of its fundamental quality. The specific kind of grace that is not delicacy, but something much harder and more enduring. "He believed that?" she asked. "What you said?" "He believed it more when I said it than when he thought it alone." A small, private smile. That is what we are for each other. The thing we cannot quite believe about ourselves, the other person holds it until we can. Zara picked up the letter from the table. "Read the last line again." "She is not right about what I am willing to do about them." She folded it, put it in her pocket, went back to work. She worked for 3 hours on the commission before her. A noblewoman's evening gown, pale gold, the most complex piece she had undertaken since the commissions began arriving. Her hands were steady and precise, and her mind was doing something else entirely, turning a question over and over, examining it from every angle, looking for the place where the answer was already there. And she simply had not admitted it. By the time she set the work down, the answer was there. It had been there for quite some time. The confrontation happened, not by design, but by the particular inevitability of a world where everyone moves in the same small orbit long enough. A musical evening at the Sullivan residence. Zara had accepted, cautiously. Lady Sullivan's attitude had shifted measurably since the winter, and 2 of the commission clients would be present. She had checked the guest list provided, and his name was not on it. He arrived 40 minutes after Zara, following a ministerial meeting. She heard the room change frequency. That specific social register shift she had learned to recognize, and looked up from her conversation and found him standing in the doorway. He found her at the same instant. The pause was socially brief, the kind that only someone watching carefully would catch. But Zara saw it, and he knew she saw it, and the awareness of that shared seeing passed between them across a room full of people who were pretending not to watch. He took a seat near the back. The music was performed beautifully. Zara heard almost none of it. At the interval, she positioned herself near the refreshment table. She had developed since the winter ball a preference for vantage points with clear sight lines, and he appeared at her shoulder within 4 minutes. She had been tracking him from 6 paces away. "Miss Curtis," he said, as though they were acquaintances. "Your Royal Highness." As though he were not the person who had occupied her thoughts with increasing thoroughness for the past 4 months. A small silence that was not small at all. "The violin was exceptional," he offered. Yes, a pause, though I suspect neither of us heard very much of it. The corner of his mouth moved. No. Around them, the interval performed its social function. Refreshments, rearranged proximity, the polite noise of a room managing itself. Several people were watching them. Several more were pretending not to. I received your letter, she said. I know. He was looking at the refreshment table rather than at her, which gave their exchange a privacy that their location technically shouldn't have permitted. I have been trying not to write another. Is it working? No. Something moved through her, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. Something warmer than she'd allowed herself in some time. Mason, you don't have to. I am not finished. She waited. He waited. I have been thinking about what you said to me, and about my father, and about something my mother told me recently that I have been carrying around since. She looked at the window across the room, the garden beyond it, dark blue in the evening. I have spent a very long time being careful because the world gave me very little margin for anything else. Being careful has kept me safe. She stopped. It has also cost me things I did not consciously choose to give it. He turned his head slightly toward her. Just enough. I am not saying yes to anything, she said. I am saying I would like to continue the conversation. The interval music began, a gentle signal that the second half was starting, the room beginning to reassemble. That, he said very quietly, is everything. She moved back toward her seat before the room could finalize its impression of them. But she felt him watching her, and this time she did not try not to feel it. She let herself feel it. She walked back to her chair with that warmth sitting in her chest, and she sat down and folded her hands in her lap and understood, with great clarity and no remaining ambiguity, that she was not going to be able to protect herself from this. She had stopped wanting to. Lady Hargrove found her at the Spring Royal Charitable Exhibition on a bright April morning, and she found her with the specific purposefulness of someone who has identified a problem and is arriving to resolve it. Lady Hargrove was 61. She wore black on principle and had spent 40 years as the particular kind of social authority who does not need to raise her voice because every room she enters is already listening. She had everything that the world of this story valued: bloodline, fortune, the hard-won confidence of someone who had never, in living memory, been informed that she was wrong. She encountered Zara near an exhibition of children's illustrations and wasted no time. Miss Curtis, her voice carried with precision, pitched to reach exactly the people she intended it to reach. How very persistent of you to keep appearing at these events. Zara turned, Lady Hargrove. I've been meaning to speak with you, she said. Speak the way some people say correct. You may not fully appreciate the damage you've caused. To yourself, which seems to concern you very little, but more importantly, to others, to the prince specifically. I don't believe I have. Your presence in his social orbit has created significant political difficulty for the crown. Each sentence was measured, placed for maximum effect. Around them, a circle of attention was quietly forming. His mother is distressed, the court is destabilized, and you. A deliberate, terrible pause. You have enjoyed the novelty of a powerful man's attention without, I suspect, genuinely considering what it costs him to bestow it. The cruelty of it was surgical, because it aimed directly at the question Zara had asked herself in the dark. Am I making his life harder? Am I taking something without understanding the cost? And used her own private doubt as a blade. She was quiet for one moment, one full breath. Lady Hargrove, she said, when she was entirely certain of her voice. I respect your concern for the prince's well-being. I share it, in fact, more than you might imagine. She kept her tone even, clear, perfectly audible, to the circle that had gathered without admitting it had gathered. But I would ask you to consider that what a woman feels, and what a man of his own free will chooses to act upon are not, quite, the same accountability. The decisions you are concerned about are his. He is the heir to this throne. I believe you can credit him with the capacity to make them. A beat, and I will not, she continued, a degree quieter, apologize for being present in a room. I have done that quite enough for one lifetime. She turned back to the children's illustration before her. A slightly lopsided horse in an improbably blue field, painted by someone who was perhaps 8 years old and had not yet learned that the world had opinions about horses and fields, and breathed very slowly until her hands were still. She did not see him. She learned later that he had been present, had arrived 20 minutes prior, was positioned across the gallery when it happened, had heard everything. She did not hear what he said to Lady Hargrove afterward. She never asked. But Lady Hargrove left the exhibition within the hour, and was notably, measurably quieter on the subject of Zara Curtis for the remainder of the season. The Queen requested an audience with Zara on a Wednesday in late April. Not suggested. Requested. The phrasing of the note was exquisitely clear on this distinction. Zara read the note twice, set it down, and then sat in the kitchen for a long time, with her hands flat on the table, looking at nothing in particular. Her mother asked no questions. She simply came in, poured tea, set it within reach, and went back to the front room. Zara was grateful for that, in a way that was difficult to articulate. She went on, Friday morning, alone. The room she was shown into was smaller than she had expected. A private sitting room, not a formal audience chamber, done in pale blue and gold. A fire burning despite the mild weather. And across the room, standing rather than sitting, a woman who had the particular quality of stillness that comes not from calm but from decades of learning to appear calm. Queen Marguerite of Valmont was 64 years old. She was not unkind. That was the first thing Zara understood, looking at her. This was not a cruel woman. This was a woman who had spent 40 years protecting something she loved with every instrument available to her, and who had arrived at a view of the world that was not wrong, exactly, but was built on premises that Zara did not share. Miss Curtis, the Queen said, please sit down. Zara sat. She folded her hands. She waited. My son, the Queen said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her, has not spoken of anything else in 4 months. You should understand that I do not say this as a compliment. I understand. He is. The Queen paused, and in the pause Zara saw something she had not expected. Not the calculation of a political move, but the brief, unguarded expression of a mother. He is the most important thing in my life. He is also, since his father died, the most important thing in the life of this kingdom. Those two facts create obligations that I cannot ask him to set aside because they are inconvenient to his feelings. I would not ask him to, Zara said. The Queen looked at her. Really looked. The kind of assessment Zara recognized, because she had been on the receiving end of assessments her entire life and had learned to hold still beneath them. You are not what I expected, the Queen said. I rarely am. A silence. Something shifted in the Queen's expression, fractionally, almost imperceptibly. My son tells me, she said carefully, that your father served this crown with complete honesty and was repaid very poorly for it. Yes. Zara kept her voice even. That is accurate. He tells me he intends to correct the official record. A pause. He did not ask my permission, he informed me. That? The Queen stopped. Something complicated moved through her face. That is not a quality I have seen in him before. In 28 years, I cannot recall him informing me of anything he had not first subjected to considerable qualification. Zara said nothing. He is different, the Queen said, since you. She said it not as an accusation and not as a compliment, as an observation. as the careful notation of a woman who has been watching her son for 28 years and has noticed a change she cannot categorize. I cannot account for that, Zara said. I have only ever been myself with him. I have no other version to offer. The Queen looked at her for a long moment. That, she said finally, very quietly, may be precisely the point. She stood. Zara stood. The audience, apparently, was concluded. At the door, the Queen paused. Did not turn fully. Your mother's commission work has been brought to my attention, she said. I am told it is exceptional. It is, Zara said. It always has been. The Queen left without another word. Zara stood in the pale blue room for a moment after she had gone. Then she walked out into the corridor and down the long staircase and out through the palace's east entrance and into the bright April morning. And she stood on the step and breathed the air and felt something settle in her. Something that had been braced for a very long time, slowly, quietly releasing. Before we arrive at what I can promise you is an ending worth every moment of what this story has cost you, I need to say something. If you have stayed with Zara through the humiliation, the careful retreats, the impossible arithmetic of loving someone the world has decided you cannot have, then you already know what kind of woman she is. And if something in this story has found a place in you that recognizes it, some old truth about dignity or about being seen, or about the cost of protecting yourself from your own wanting, then stay here. Subscribe to Power and Silence Whispers. Because every story on this channel is built for women who feel deeply and remember everything. The final act begins now. Don't look away. The Queen's summer reception was held in the palace's eastern gardens and on an evening in late June, when the sky stayed light until nearly 10 o'clock, and the lanterns strung between the old oak trees turned everything amber and warm and slightly unreal. Every family of significance attended. Every outstanding social question of the season expected its resolution here, or agreed to wait a full year for another opportunity. The air had the quality that formal occasions sometimes carried in the best of circumstances. A sense of occasion, of weight, of things mattering. Zara almost did not come. She had spent the 2 weeks since the Queen's audience in a state of unusual internal quiet. Not the suppressed quiet of someone managing difficult feeling, but something more settled and more honest. She had worked. She had talked with her mother in the evenings. She had allowed herself to think about the future without flinching away from the shape of what she found there. She went to the reception because she had decided, somewhere in those 2 quiet weeks, that she was finished with letting fear make the larger choices of her life. Her father had made the right choice, and it had cost him everything, and she had spent 5 years watching that cost and telling herself she would be smarter, she would be more careful. She would not risk herself on things that the world had decided were not for people like her. She understood now that this was not wisdom. This was letting the world that had hurt her father continue, through her own hands, to take from her. She wore green. Not apologetic green, not careful green, but a deep and certain shade she had sewn herself over 6 evenings from fabric purchased with her own commission earnings. She had designed the cut herself, clean lines, nothing borrowed, nothing repaired, nothing assembled from the remnants of other things. She had made it entirely new from the beginning, exactly as she wanted it. She looked at herself in the mirror before she left and thought, yes, this. The garden received her without drama, which was, she understood, its own kind of statement. The social world had been in the process of revising its position for weeks now, quietly, without fanfare, with the particular efficiency of people who understand that public opinion is not a fixed object but a responsive one, and that the direction of response is itself information worth tracking. She was not welcomed warmly. She was not mocked openly. She was navigated around with a careful courtesy that told her everything she needed to know about where the calculation currently stood. She found her commission clients, had the conversations she had come to have, accepted two additional inquiries with composed gratitude, and moved through the gathering with the quiet, specific confidence of a woman who has recently understood something important about herself and is still getting accustomed to the feeling. She had been there 40 minutes when the quality of the evening changed. She felt it before she saw it, that specific atmospheric shift, the room reorganizing its attention around a new gravitational center. She turned. He was at the entrance to the garden. He was looking at her. He had been looking at her, she understood immediately, since before she turned. He had come through the entrance into the amber lantern light, and the first thing he had done was find her in the crowd. Not scan the room, not acknowledge the ministers already moving toward him. Find her, specifically. The room noticed. Of course it did. Within 30 seconds, the nature of the evening had changed. Conversations had shifted. The social mathematics were being furiously recalculated. And everyone who had spent the past season managing careful neutrality on the subject of Zara Curtis was suddenly aware that the management phase might be concluding. Mason moved through the garden, past Lord Pemberton, who touched his elbow with the specific urgency of a man delivering important political information. Mason acknowledged him with a word and kept walking, past Lady Fairhaven, whose daughter was one of the three candidates, and who turned as he passed with an expression that Zara felt rather than saw. Past three conversations that stopped as he moved through them and started again, different after he had gone. Past everyone. He stopped in front of her. The nearby conversations died. The quiet moved outward in rings. "Miss Curtis," he said. And then, because they were past all of it, Zara, she looked at him, at the expression that was simply and completely itself. No performance, no management, no careful maintenance of appropriate register. "Your Royal Highness," she said softly, "I have been thinking about something you said." He kept his voice low, but he was not hiding this conversation. He was not positioning them in a corner or angling their bodies away from observation. He was standing in the center of the garden, in front of everyone who had an opinion, and speaking to her. On the balcony, the first night, she waited. "You said your father believed in being prepared for a world that might not always want you in it." Something moved through his face, careful, and beneath the care, fierce. "I have thought about that sentence for 6 months, because I believe it describes the premise you have been living by. That the world will not want you, that expecting otherwise is foolishness, that wanting things the world has decided you cannot have is." He stopped. "I believe it is the most expensive thing that has ever been done to you. More expensive than the gown. More expensive than the commissions that closed. More expensive than any of it." The garden was very still. "And I want to say something," he continued, "in front of every person here who has contributed to that cost or who has stood by while it was extracted. Mason," she said his name quietly, not in protest, but in warning, in care, in the specific concern of someone who knows what public statements from princes cost. "I am aware of what I am doing," he said, simply. "I have thought about it rather carefully." She looked at him. She looked at his face. The face she had first seen on a December balcony, which had looked then like a man who had run out of patience with a world that required him to perform. And she saw that something in it had changed, not into something softer, into something more completely itself. "There is no title in this kingdom," he said, and his voice was steady and clear, and carried exactly as far as the garden needed it to carry. "No bloodline, no fortune, no name or family, or carefully managed reputation, that has ever impressed me as much as Zara Curtis's character. The garden produced no applause. It was not that kind of moment. It produced something rarer and more lasting. The specific silence of a large group of people simultaneously confronting the distance between the assessment they had made and the one being offered to them now. The silence of revision, of recalculation, of the social world doing what it always eventually did, which was locate the center of gravity and orient toward it. Zara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her father, about the choice he had made in a cold winter 11 years ago, alone, with no audience and no lantern light and no expectation of acknowledgement. She thought about her mother, sitting in a firelit chair with commission cards on the table between them, her face managing everything it felt. She thought about a pale blue gown, repaired by candlelight, and the sound of laughter moving across a ballroom like cold water finding cracks. She thought about what she had told herself for 5 years, about what was allowed. She looked at Mason. She extended her hand. He took it, not with ceremony, not with performance, simply, quietly, with the steadiness of someone who has decided where they are and intends to remain. The garden watched. Zara let it watch. The formal announcement came 6 weeks later. The newspapers gave it enormous attention. The social world absorbed it with the particular efficiency of an organism that cannot reverse the tide and therefore reframes the shore. People who had laughed at her, her gown discovered retrospectively that they had always recognized something exceptional about her. Women who had whispered behind jeweled fans found the memory of those whispers conveniently inaccessible. Lady Hargrove sent a note of congratulation. It was graciously worded. Cecile Curtis read it and set it aside and made no comment, which was its own complete and perfect commentary. The official record was corrected. Her father's name was restored, not with ceremony, not with public announcement, but in the registry where it mattered, in the document that said what the truth had always been. Cecile held the paper for a very long time the evening it arrived. She did not cry. She sat with it in the firelit room and was, for a while, simply with her husband in the only way still available to her. Zara sat across from her and did not speak and did not look away. The wedding was in October, when the city had turned the particular gold and amber of a season ending well. The palace chapel held 400 people. The morning light came through the east window in long, angled shafts that fell across stone floors, worn smooth by centuries of occasions that had mattered. The orchestra was in the gallery. The flowers were white and deep green, her choice entirely, which had surprised no one who knew her. Her gown was ivory silk. Her mother had selected the fabric, had spent 3 weeks handling bolt after bolt in the most extraordinary fabric house in the city, running cloth through fingers that had sewn for 40 years and knew the difference between silk that looked beautiful and silk that was beautiful. The embroidery was Cecile's work, hours of it, weeks of it, stitched in the evenings by the fire in the old chair, the same fingers that had restrung pearls onto thread so fine it disappeared. Along the hem and neckline and the long edge of the train, a pattern of small flowers and intertwined leaves that was recognizably, unmistakably, entirely her mother's hand. Zara stood before the mirror in the dressing room and looked at herself and felt the gown as a different kind of thing than any garment she had worn before. Not armor, not strategy, not something assembled from the salvaged remnants of other things. Something made new, made whole, made for her by hands that loved her, from nothing. Zara, her mother's voice, from behind her. She turned. Cecile was standing in the doorway of the dressing room in her best dress, the deep blue one, the one she wore for occasions that deserved to be met with everything you had. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was feeling something very large and had made a decision about how much of it to show. She crossed the room and straightened a fold in the train that did not strictly need straightening. Your father, she said quietly to the mirror, to Zara's reflection rather than her face, would have been so proud of you. A pause. Not because of any of this. A small gesture that encompassed the chapel, the palace, the occasion, because of who you are. Because you have never, not once in any room, apologized for taking up space in it. Zara looked at her mother in the mirror. I learned that from someone, she said. Cecile pressed her lips together briefly, smoothed the train one more time. Stepped back. Come then, she said. They're waiting. She walked down the aisle on no one's arm but her own. This had required a conversation. Mason had understood immediately and had needed no further explanation. The attendance had required slightly more. The tradition was clear. Zara had been clearer. She walked the length of the chapel alone, in ivory silk and her mother's embroidery, and she felt the weight of every eye in the room, and she did not perform beneath it. She simply walked. She simply arrived. He was waiting at the end of the aisle. He was looking at her with the expression she had first seen on a December balcony, the private one, the one that had nothing to do with occasions or audiences or any of the things that surrounded them. He looked at her the way he had looked at her that night, when she had said the most honest thing anyone has said to me, and something in him had shifted in a direction it had never since reversed. When she reached him, he said nothing for a moment. Hello, she said. His smile arrived fully and without restraint, for the first time in front of a room that was watching. For the first time without management or calculation, or the careful governance of what he allowed his face to show in public. Hello, he said. The ceremony was beautiful in the way that real things are beautiful. Not perfect, but true. The light moved across the stone floor. The music was exactly right. The words were old and had been said in this chapel by generations of people for whom they had meant different things, and today they meant what Zara and Mason intended them to mean, which was simply and entirely this: I choose you. Knowing the cost, knowing the risk, knowing everything, I choose you. At the reception, when the orchestra began the first waltz and the floor was given over to them, Zara understood why the room held its breath. Because the first time it had been a declaration. Because this time it was a fulfillment. Because the same man who had crossed a ballroom in December past, every titled woman in the kingdom, was crossing a floor again, this time toward his wife. And the room was watching the distance between those two moments and understanding what it contained. He took her hand. She stepped toward him. They danced. Not in the careful way of the first time, not with the maintained propriety of two people who were learning the shape of what they might be to each other, with the ease and certainty of two people who have been through something real together and know the difference between performing closeness and simply being close. You are not holding yourself as though the floor might give way, he said. No. She looked at him. I have it on very good authority that the floor is sound. He looked back at her. The room moved around them. 200 people, candlelight, music, the amber warmth of an evening in October, and Zara was aware of none of it with the same quality that she was aware of him. His hand at her waist, the steadiness of his attention, the expression on his face that was simply and entirely itself. Are you happy? He asked. She considered it. She gave it the full and honest consideration it deserved, which was what she gave everything. She thought of her father, of a man who had stood in a cold winter and made a choice without an audience and without any expectation of being thanked for it, because it was right, and he was the kind of man who did right things. She thought of her mother's hands on ivory silk. She thought of a pale blue gown that had cost 3 weeks of candlelight and been mocked by women who would now bow their heads to her in a corridor. She thought of a balcony in December and a man looking at a dark garden and saying, "That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me tonight." She thought of everything it had taken, everything it had cost, everything she had protected herself from, and everything she had finally, at considerable personal risk, stopped protecting herself from. "Yes," she said. And then, because honesty was not a thing she had ever been able to set down for very long, "Ask me again in a year, when the occasion has settled, and we've had our first real argument about something neither of us will want to admit we were wrong about." The corner of his mouth moved. "I look forward to it. I know you do." She did. That was one of the things she had learned, that he looked forward to her. The actual her, including the honest, difficult parts of her. The way you look forward to something that makes you more alive than you were before it arrived. "So do I." The music continued. The room watched. But Zara Curtis, no longer at the edge of anything, no longer invisible, no longer assembling herself from salvaged pieces of what others had discarded, was not performing. She was simply, entirely, undeniably present, and the woman they had trained themselves to overlook had become, in the end, impossible to forget. She walked into that ballroom in a repaired gown, and they made her feel like nothing. And then one person, just one, looked at her the way her father had always believed she deserved to be looked at. Not despite what she was, because of it, because peace is rarer than beauty, because sincerity cannot be purchased or performed or inherited, because the woman they spent an entire season trying to make invisible turned out to be the only one in the room who was completely, genuinely real. That is what this story is. Not a fairy tale. A truth about what happens when a person refuses, through humiliation, through loss, through every quiet cruelty an elegant world can devise, to stop being exactly who they are. If Zara's story found something in you tonight, if it reached some place that recognized her, that recognized her father's sacrifice, or her mother's hands, or the particular cost of walking into a room that doesn't want you and lifting your chin anyway, then you already know what this channel is for. Subscribe to Power and Silence Whispers. Turn on your notifications. And come back, because there is always another story, and it will find you exactly where this one did. Before you go, leave me one thing in the comments. Not a reaction, a truth. Tell me about a moment when someone finally saw you. Or a moment when you chose yourself, even when it was the harder thing. Or simply tell me, do you think Zara was right to walk away when she did? And what made her finally stop? This channel is for women who understand that the most elegant thing a person can do is refuse to disappear. Until next time.
They laughed beneath the chandelier glow, whispers dressed sharper than diamonds and gold. You stood alone where the shadows fell, wearing grace they could never sell.
Threadbare sleeves and a trembling sigh, holding your silence while the cruel passed by. But somewhere between the violins and lies, I saw the sadness behind your eyes.
And all the gilded hearts in the room felt colder than the winter moon. But you felt real.
So dance with me while the whole world stares. Let them choke on their pride tonight. You were never meant
the haze, no hunger hiding behind your smile, no polished games, no practice style.
And when they tore your dignity apart, I felt the shame strike my own heart, because the cruelest rooms I've ever known were built from people carved of stone.
Still you stood there, calm and proud, like moonlight untouched by the crowd. And I could not look away.
So dance with me while the whole world burns. Let them whisper your name tonight. They spent their lives chasing empty things, while I was chasing light.
One slow turn and the kingdom changed. One soft touch and I came alive. They called you poor beneath those stars, but they never saw how rich you are.
No diamond shines like mercy does. No throne survives without real love. And everyone